Another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. And today we're going to continue our series on reading about Anarchy Works. And last week we discussed cities and how cities will work in an anarchist civilization or society. And it was pretty great. Now we're going to get into how catastrophe or how we deal with drought, famine, and other catastrophes. And then since this is a short section, we're just going to go right on to the next section and finish the whole chapter out. Finish this chapter on economy. And then the next chapter is on the environment. So super excited to get through this. I know they're going to talk about some dope stuff. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Oh gosh. Um, Governments assert additional control through emergency powers on the premise that greater centralization is necessary in emergencies. On the contrary, centralized structures are less agile and responding to chaotic situations. Studies show that after natural disasters, most rescues are carried out by common people, not government experts or professional aid workers. Yeah, they showed this in the about the Katrina situation early on. Definitely was crazy to see that. Like it actually showed you, if y'all remember the couple sections back, how the media was portraying people, especially people of color, as like looters and stuff like that, and cops as the heroes. But when you actually look at the actual pictures, you see that the people, especially people of color, were helping other people out. Right? They were helping each other out to get through these tough times, and the cops were just trying to bash people for breaking into grocery stores that were already drowned. Right? These It's not like the grocery stores were going to use that stuff that was drowned and during Katrina to resell it. That stuff is gone. They were just going to throw it out, right? And the cops were more focused on protecting these businesses rather than actually helping other people. Meanwhile, the people of Katrina, of that area of New Orleans, were helping each other out. We're trying to help folks survive. So yeah, definitely big point right here. More humanitarian aid is offered by people than by governments. Government aid often facilitates political agendas, such as supporting political allies against their opponents, spreading genetically modified foods, and undermining local agriculture with huge shipments of free food that are quickly replaced by commercial imports, monopolizing the upset market. Again, I don't like this kind of little shot against GMOs. This is a common like issue, um, with not necessarily just anarchists, but almost everybody who doesn't really understand GMOs. Because I've researched this myself a lot. Because one of my own things is like, how can we maintain a society where we have so many people, and we've built our entire society off of industrialized agriculture. Like, can we go to permaculture and other things? Maybe we can. There's some evidence that we probably can use permagardens and or permacultures and food forests and things like that to supply people, especially if people break up into smaller groups. However, I think it's still going to be necessary to have GMOs, right? To have um, plots where we genetically modify the food to grow bigger and more nutritious and, out of the same amount of land. So I researched this very deeply to see, are GMOs actually tied to problems with our health and things like that. And I wasn't able to find any conclusive evidence suggesting that. What I did find, and where a lot of the you know um, stories of GMOs leading to cancer, this, that, and the other, actually comes from the pesticides used on the agriculture. Right. So what happens is, with especially with GMOs, like even like big companies like Monsanto, who are evil, don't get me wrong, what they actually do is they modify the food to be resistant to pesticides. And then they superpower those pesticides in order to get rid of all those pests. And that includes, pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, whatever, right? So all this poison gas and toxins and stuff like that they're putting in the soil, they're doing that to get rid of all the fungus, all the insects, all the pests that they don't want eating their food, right? And what that does is it poisons the soil, and but the food itself is healthy, but it's just more resistant to germs. And that means when we eat it, our bodies therefore become not necessarily more resistant because of how it's consumed, but our bodies have a harder time seeing the difference between I'm sorry, our bodies do come more resistant to germs, but it's like there's there's good germs and bad germs. So in our bodies we have bad germs, and those bad germs can become more resistant to the medicines that we develop to fight those germs. So I'm simplifying this a lot, but you can look this up for yourself. I'll post the research I found before, if I can find it again. It's been a long time since I've researched this stuff. Um, well, only a few months, but compared to all the stuff I research, it's a long time. But yeah, it's very interesting what's going on there with GMOs. So in a circuitous way, yes, GMOs are bad, but what's actually bad is not the genetically modified food. It's the pesticides, the genetically modified pesticides, and being resistant to that in the poisoning of the soil and things like that. So, anyways, important to remember there. Bit of a tangent. So yeah, for that matter, a significant portion of the international arms trade is disguised in government aid shipments. It is possible that people would be better off in catastrophes without governments. We can also develop effective alternatives to government assistance based on the principle of solidarity. If one anarchist community is struck by a catastrophe, it can count on help from others. Whereas in a capitalist context, catastrophe is an occasion for politically motivated forms of aid. Yep, if not outright opportunism. Anarchists give assistance freely with the assurance that it will be reciprocated when the time comes. Yeah, this is a great point too. And we see this throughout history as well, right? A lot of countries, a lot of places, or not even countries, but like peoples, right? In pre-industrial societies, they were more collaborative, right? They helped each other out. There was no nationalism, right? Nationalism only comes up when you have a nation, when you have a authority who is like, this is our identity, and we're trying to be exclusive and this, that, and the other, right? Many other society or cultures, I guess you can call them societies too, that were not statists, that were not nationalists, even though they had a general sense of culture and identity, it almost never was exclusive, right? They always welcome people in to join if they wanted to, right? So it wasn't about, oh, you're not from here, therefore blah blah blah. It was like, oh, you want to join? Yeah, come on in, just follow what we do, right? Now if you didn't want to follow their culture, then they'll be look at you weird, like, you want to come here and tell us what to do, but not, partake or not really respect the culture. That's a different matter. But most cultures, were very open and very helpful to other people during all times of catastrophes. And you see this again throughout human migration patterns. The fact that humans migrated out of Africa in most likely several waves, and that they yes, they sort of went to war with other creatures, other hominids, but mostly they procreated with them. And that's why, most other humans who are from other places, Europe, Asia, and things like that, have DNA of Neanderthals, DNA of Denisovans, and things like that. Um, 'Cause a lot of it was procreation. Furthermore, you know, this point right here is just you see this every day, right? In terms of um, neighborhoods or communities where you have an actual strong sense of community, where people care about what happens to other people. You don't need, a central authority to tell people that, oh, that person needs help, right? If you are in a if you are in a community where there is actually a sense of community, where you actually care about other people, then whenever you see something going on, you go and figure out what's happening, right? The idea of nosy neighbors. But the difference is that in a neighborhood where there is no sense of community, nosy neighbors are just nosy neighbors, right? But if people actually care, nosy neighbors are the people who are looking out for you. Those are neighborhoods where you can leave your door unlocked and it'll be just fine. Like nobody's gonna steal your stuff, and that's the difference. So yeah, this is really really great stuff. Spain in 1936 again provides a good example. In Mas de la Matas, as in other parts, the can- cantonal district committee kept track of shortages and and surpluses. I was going to say surpluses and surpluses, and made arrangements for even distribution. Part of his work was to make sure all collectors were taken care of in the event of natural disasters. For example, this year the principal crops of Mas de la Matas, Seno, and La Gennembrosa were destroyed by hailstorms. In a capitalist regime, such natural disasters would have meant endless privations, heavy debts, foreclosures, and even emigration of some workers for several years. But in the regime of libertarian solidarity, these difficulties were overcome by the efforts of the whole district. Provisions, seeds, etc., everything needed to repair the damage were furnished in the spirit of brotherhood and solidarity, without conditions, without contracting debts. The revolution has created a new civilization. Beautiful, beautiful. Anarchism is one of the few revolutionary ideas that does not require modernization. Anarchist societies are free to organize themselves at any sustainable level of technology. This means that societies currently existing as hunter gatherers or groups of people who choose to adopt such a lifestyle can practice this most efficient and ecological form of subsistence, the most conducive to a resilient ecosystem that is less vulnerable to natural disasters. Beautiful. And again, once again, it's fascinating because we see this in history, right? History is such a great teacher. We see that the shift from hunter gatherer cultures to agriculture, right, created a huge weakness in societies. And those first couple hundred years of shifting, of it going into agriculture, was the worst time for most humans around the world, right? Maybe even first couple like 1,000 years of the Neolithic Revolution, because when people go into agriculture, your entire economy and lifestyle is way more fragile, because all your right you spend most of your day for usually like 10, 12 hours a day farming, trying to till the land and put those crops in and weed the pests out, or we take the weeds out and protect it against pests and other things that might come and eat your stuff. And if anything happens, if there's a hailstorm, or a famine or a scourge of whatever, right, all your crops are gone, and that means your food is gone and your income is gone, right? Because you can't get all your food from your farm. Well, it's different versions of it. Sometimes if you farm different things in your farm, you have a little bit more adaptability, but that means um when people are in a a civilization, if you will, like the beginnings of civilization, when they began to sell their crops to other people, it became more profitable to grow a huge amount of the same type of crop, or the cash crop. um, but what that comes with the fragility, because if that cash crop gets wiped out, that means all your income gets wiped out, right? And you have no way of eating that winter. Um, Furthermore, you have no income coming in, so your life is ruined for that entire year, and maybe even couple of years, until either you have the time and effort to replenish, or you just have to move, right? Versus hunter-gatherer societies, every day you just went and you got your food. People didn't actually starve on a daily basis. If they did, we wouldn't be here. People lived in hunter-gatherer cultures for over 100,000 years, precisely because it's so sustainable, right? Even if you don't find everything you need today, you find more tomorrow, or the day after that, right? And furthermore, it should be foraging cultures, because most of their food was from foraging fruits and vegetables, right? That's why we're omnivores. We get most of our nutrition from that, and hunting, getting the meat was only like what 20%, maybe up to 40% in some societies, but it was almost never the majority of protein, or I'm sorry, the majority of nutrition that came from hunting. So hunter-gatherer cultures, or rather foraging cultures, were way more adaptable, way more nutritious, way more kind of balanced as a society. Um, but of course, in terms of evolution, it's about survival of the fittest. And people don't realize that fittest does not mean better, or it doesn't like mean like stronger and stuff like that. All it means is that you are fit enough to procreate. And if you procreate more, then you'll be more successful in terms of evolution. And so those agricultural cultures who were able to come together and share those resources between a huge amount of people, they reproduced more, right? A lot of that was forced too, because of it introduced more gender inequality, and they required their women to just mostly just be there for breeding, basically. All right. Very unfortunate, but that's why those societies were able to out reproduce the hunter-gatherer cultures, because hunter-gatherer cultures would only ever reproduce every couple of years, right? So they would wait about 3 or 4 years between having children before they, decide to have another child. And they had, they even practiced, um, we would call it infanticide, but it was really a system of abortion, in order to regulate that, so they don't have kids that they can't raise, that they can't, help. Versus in agricultural culture, um, you was popping out kids 2 3 times, a year, or 2 years, every 2 years. So even though those kids weren't the most nutritious, right? Because again, having a cash crops setting, you don't have all the food that you need. You don't have all the nutrition. So, and we see that once again in the anthropological data, where the kids and things like that in these agriculture societies were less nutritious. They were not as physically fit and things like that. There was more child mortality in these settings. But even if one child died every, out of every three, if you had three children, in 2 years, versus the other culture who had one child every 3 years, it evens out. So eventually you out reproduce anyways. So it's just these nuances are super important to realize, because we like to think that our society is so much more advanced and progressive, but really we just reproduce more. Right? We just have more kids, and that's not necessarily a system, a real progress. And but yeah, that's super important to realize, man. These other cultures who were able to adapt with disasters, I think that's way more powerful than what we have now. In that any disaster and our entire infrastructure can collapse, and we're kicked back hundreds of years, or even thousands of years. That's scary. So we need to figure out that balance, of like, how do we have this versatile, adaptable culture, as well as have, able to, reproduce and progress very quickly in like quick growth spurts. We need to figure that out. But anyways, let's get into this last section of this chapter. And says, meeting our needs without keeping count. Capitalism has produced. Well, let me drink some water first before I start this one. Whew, okay. Capitalism has produced amazing gadgets, but the military and the police are almost always the first to use new technologies. And often the wealthiest people are the only ones who benefit from them. Capitalism has produced undreamed of wealth, but it is hoarded by parasites who did not produce it and who lord over the slaves and wage laborers who created it. Ooh, buddy, they going hard right now. You're definitely right about that. I know people say, "Oh, they invent the ideas. That's why they got popular." But not really. Like, I can have a million ideas, but if I don't have the people who can actually build it, who actually make it happen, it doesn't really matter, right? These people are rich and get more rich because they have the power to force or coerce or otherwise, motivate people to build their ideas for them. And even those who are able to create their own ideas, like today we can do that with coding. That's still built off the back of all those people who built those computers, right? And who built the ability to code, um, to compute, really. And it's a long, long history, and a lot of shoulders and backs that we're standing on in order to do this. So, anyways, um, competition may seem to be a useful principle for encouraging efficiency, but efficiency for what purpose exactly, right? Beneath the mythology it has created, capitalism is not actually a competitive system. Oh my gosh, yes. I can go a lot into this. So let's see what they say first before I go into my tangents here, because goodness. Workers are divided and played against each other, yeah, while the elite cooperate to maintain their subjection. Mm. The wealthy may compete for bigger slices of the pie, but they regularly take up arms together to ensure that every day the pie is baked and brought to their table. Ooh, that's a great analogy there. When capitalism was still a new phenomenon, one could describe it more honestly without being confused by decades of propaganda about its supposed virtues. Abraham Lincoln, hardly an anarchist, could see clearly enough that capitalists generally act harmoniously and in concert to fleece the people. And that's what's so freaking hilarious, is that people here in America especially say, "Oh, America, we're capitalism," stuff like that. But the entire foundation of America was almost completely against capitalists, right? A lot of the people, a lot of the founding fathers were like, "Oh my gosh, capitalists are terrible. They're turning our um, people into wage slavers, slave labor and stuff like that." Like, yes, you had slavery, and like what people don't realize is that during the period of slavery, right, as the North became industrialized, there began to be less and less people who cared about actual slavery because they compared the capitalist industries, right, the factories, to slavery. They said, "Oh, this is the white slavery," right? Look that up. Look it up. And so the people who the Quakers, the people who wanted to abolish, the abolitionists who wanted to abolish actual slavery, that sector became smaller and smaller because people were caring more and more about the plight of quote unquote white slaves, precisely because they saw that the capitalists were turning all these, middle class, or it wasn't even middle class at the time, but all these commoners into wage slaves, basically. All right. So the beginning of America was a kind of battle against capitalists, and we lost because industrialism um, was too economically productive, right? That that productivity out outlasted, or kind of was more important than the ethics, than the plight of the wage workers. And so the fact that we are a capitalist nation today is actually a loss if you had to ask our founding fathers. But let's continue. Capitalism has failed horribly at meeting people's needs and enraging a failed distribution of goods. Throughout the world, millions die from treatable diseases because they cannot afford the medicine that would save them. And people starve to death while their countries export cash crops. Yep. Under capitalism, everything is for sale. Culture is a commodity that can be manipulated to sell lingerie or skin cream or the metaverse. Nature is a resource to be sucked dry and destroyed for profit. Oh, excuse me. People must sell their time and energy to the owning class in order to buy back a fraction of what they produce. This is a deeply rooted system that shapes our values and relationships and defies most attempts to abolish it. The socialist revolutions in the USSR and China did not go deep enough, not by far, as they never fully abolished capitalism. It reemerged stronger than before. Many anarchist attempts have not gone deep enough either, right? Exactly. Anarcho capitalists. Capitalism may well have resurfaced in these experiments if hostile governments had not crushed them first. Yep. Like, if you don't realize that the root of all this is a hierarchy, is hierarchies, period, and anything that creates a hierarchy, such as money, will just lead to the same things, then you're not going to solve the problem, right? All these people are like, socialists, let's change, let's reform, let's just change the laws. It's not going to solve the problem. It's just going to move it, it's just going to kick the can down the road. And that's the fundamental problem with not being revolutionary enough. Power and alienation must be pursued to their roots. It is not enough for the workers to own their factories collectively if they are controlled by managers and the work still reduces them to machines. That's why the letters were right. Alienation is not simply the absence of legal ownership of the means and fruits of production, it is a lack of control over one's relationship with the world. Worker ownership of a factory is meaningless if it is still administered by others on their behalf. The workers must organize themselves and control the factory directly. And even if they control the factory directly, alienation persists where the broader economic relationships, the factory itself, dictates the form their labor takes. Exactly. Right. Like, if you have to work in order to make a living, period, you've already on the wrong track. You're already, not solving any problems. You have to build a community in which people don't actually have to work in order to get food and water and shelter. Right. That seems like I'm advocating for laziness or whatever, but the fact is humans aren't lazy, right? Humans want to do things, right? We just need people to get out the way, or for the opportunity, right, to actually do those things. And so, under capitalism, a huge barrier to actually doing what you want to do is the fact that you have to work for somebody else in order to get just the basic needs: food, water, shelter, and things like that. And because you have to work to do that, that means you can't work doing what you actually want to work. And so people become lazy, not because they are, not because they don't want to do anything, but because they don't want to do what you want them to do. They don't want to do what they're being coerced to do. All right. It's a form of rebellion, if in a way, if you look at it like that. People aren't motivated to do things that they don't want to do. It's simple. But for some reason we don't see it like that. Can a person truly be free working on an assembly line, denied creativity, and treated as a machine? The form of work itself must change so that people can pursue the skills and activities that give them joy. The separation of work from other human activities is one of the roots of alienation. Production itself becomes a sort of obsession that justifies exploiting people or destroying the environment for the sake of efficiency. I see that way too often, and it's extremely disgusting. Like, oh, what about productivity? Wh- What about productivity? Like, what's the point of being productive if you're just producing things? Like, what? It just comes at the cost of just exploitation, right? Why are we producing things? What's the use of it? um, Productivity is not what we're it's not the results, it's not what we're looking for. It shouldn't be what we're looking for. It's just a kind of byproduct of the actual important stuff of working on things that you care about, of being creative, of being recognized for your creativity and things like that. Capitalism doesn't actually do that. We say it does, but it doesn't. And we can see this when you have an idea and you want to do something with it. What can you do, right? You need money, you need um, access to people, you need all this other stuff before you can even get to work on your idea. And that's the fundamental problem there. If we view happiness as a human need no less than food and clothing, then the division between productive and non productive activity, between work and play, melts away. The squatting movement in Barcelona and the gift economies of many indigenous societies provide examples of the blurring of work and play. Beautiful. In a free society, exchange is simply a symbolic assurance that everyone is contributing to the common resources. Exactly. People don't hoard resources or take advantage of others because they have to give in order to receive. It's reinforced reciprocity. Yeah. But exchange can present problems by attaching a quantitative value to every object and experience, thus stripping them of their subjective value. Exactly. Right. And the efforts of being objective, what we're actually doing is ignoring the subjectivity. It's ignoring the fact that there is always going to be subjectivity and there always should be subjectivity. And if we just try to reduce everything, every subjective thing into an objective monetary value or some other, value, then we lose the very essence of what we enjoy about things. We lose that subjective value, which can't and shouldn't be quantified. Let's continue. Where once an ice cream cone was worth a delicious 10 minutes of finger licking goodness in the sun, and a book was worth several afternoons of enjoyment and reflection and possibly even life changing insight. After these goods are assessed according to the regime of exchange, an ice cream cone is worth a fourth of a book. Further into this process, to make the exchanges more efficient, while consequently fixing the quantitative value as inherent rather than comparative, an ice cream cone is worth 1 unit of currency and a book 4 units of currency. Right. And what's the point of these currencies, right? The monetary value replaces the subjective value of the object, the pleasure people find in it. On one hand, people and their desires are taken out of the equation, while on the other hand, all values, pleasure, usefulness, inspiration, are observed into a observed are absorbed into a quantitative value, and money itself becomes a symbol for these other values. Exactly. I've spoken about that so many times before. It's very disgusting the fact that we use this monetary system as a store of value. Like, what the hell does that mean? Right? You can't store. It's like trying to say I store my experience. Like, if I go to a concert, you can't store that experience. It's done. It's over. Right? It's a memory, but that memory is different than the actual experience. Every time you relive the memory, it changes the experience in your brain, and so this literally it's literally ephemeral, right? You cannot store an experience, just like you can't store the value, because the value is subjective. The value is your subjective experience of enjoying life, of having an ice cream cone, reading a book, going to a concert. All right. And so if we could put dollar amounts on all of that, what we're saying is that this amount of dollars is my experience. It doesn't really make sense. It's not. But we've tricked ourselves into believing so. And that's why every day, every time you ever get frustrated about, oh, why don't I have nothing but why don't I have money to do this or to do that, or how you feel about yourself based on how much income you have, it's that schism. It's realizing in your something in your brain realizes that this is not right, right? I should not have to, you know, reduce myself to a monetary value, nor should I have to reduce my experiences, my things that I enjoy about life to a monetary value. In effect, possessing money comes to symbolize having access to enjoyment or the fulfillment of a desire. Exactly. But money, by fixing a quantitative value, robs objects of the sense of fulfillment they might bring. Because humans cannot experience quantitative abstract value. In eating an ice cream cone, the pleasure is in the act. But in buying a commodity, the pleasure is in the purchase, right? And the magical moment that an abstract value is transformed into a tangible possession. Experts such a money exerts such a powerful influence on notions of value that consumption itself is always anticlimactic. Once the commodity is purchased, it loses its value, especially as people come to prioritize abstract value over subjective value. Furthermore, having purchased it, you lose money and your total holdings of symbolic value decrease. Hence, the nagging feeling of guilt that accompanies spending money. I feel that all the time. And it's extremely disheartening and disgusting and annoying and frustrating and terrible. And it shouldn't be so. It's not natural, it's not good, it's not valuable. If you have to use that word. In addition to alienation, exchange creates power over. If one person accumulates more quantitative value, they have accrued the right to a greater proportion of the community's resources. So they literally have power over other people. Systems of exchange and currency, like the barter network in Argentina or the coupon system for purchasing goods in parts of anarchist Spain, rely on customs and social arrangements to prevent the reemergence of capitalism. For example, a gift economy could function at a local level with exchange used only for regional trade, but people could deliberately set up work environments that encourage personal development, creativity, fun, and self organization, while decentralized federations of such workplaces could award one another with coupons for the goods they produce, so each person has access to the wealth they created by all. Think about that. A system where you don't need, the money to have fun, to do anything. The money is just there for to get things that are like beyond that, right? um, and this is a system I saw an economist talk about as well, right? The idea of having different currencies, of having a local currency, a regional currency, and an international currency, and by doing so, you protect each level, right? So if anything happens on a national level, that local currency is not affected. Right, you don't get massive inflation just because the national level of currency, experiences some fluctuations. Just and vice versa, if something happens in the local currency, right? If there's an influx of certain material or a bust, a problem with the local production, the lack of currency in that area does not affect the global or national currency. And so the idea of having multiple levels makes sense on many levels, not just an anarchist sense, but an economic sense, even under capitalism. But capitalism doesn't care about what's efficient for people; it cares about what's efficient for making as much money as possible. um, so that's why we have the system that we have today, and an increasing, monetization of every single aspect of our lives. Because if you can, the more you can monetize, the more money you can make. And so, of course, on the capitalism, you know, we're going to go more towards that. And that's why the metaverse and NFTs are so terrible, because the ideas are great, right? You can do amazing things with NFTs in the metaverse that have nothing to do with money, but because it can be a great way to make more money, then of course, the main innovations and rollouts of this new technology will be towards money, and it's disgusting. But it is a worthwhile challenge to do away with exchange and currency altogether. Within free stores or free cycle, the symbolic assurance provided by exchange or barter is unnecessary. The assurance that everyone will contribute to the commonwealth springs from the culture of the spaces themselves. As a participant, you express the desire to give and to receive, and your inclusion in the social space increases as you carry out both of these activities. In such contexts, giving pleases a person just as much as receiving. Isn't that beautiful? Right? It's like any relationship, any healthy relationship. You should both want to give and to receive. If you only do one or the other, right, it's not a good relationship. It's not even a relationship. It's just a one way, action. Um, but if you expect to give and receive, if you enjoy both giving and receiving, then that creates a healthy relationship. And that's, isn't that what we're after here? So the world is bountiful enough to provide for everyone's needs. Scarcity is a dangerous illusion that functions as a self fulfilling prophecy. Exactly, right? The creation of agriculture created scarcity because it created a space where you had to be in this one place and get as much as you can from this one place. But nature doesn't work like that, right? Nature works such that there's things that grow here and then they die. And then you move on and let it, replenish. Right. You have to give it time to replenish. And if you just keep staying in that one location, just trying to, get the same resources to come out of that one location, it's not it's not realistic, right? That is scarce because you're trying to force something that's not natural, that doesn't really naturally happen. This is why those hunter-gatherer cultures, those foraging cultures, lasted for hundreds of thousands of years because they moved. Right, anytime they realized that there wasn't enough resources in this one area, they picked up and left. Right, so they stayed in one area for only a couple months, maybe years, but they realized that they can't stay here forever, and they moved along, and they let the earth, the land, replenish itself. It's just think about it, man. It's just common sense. Like if you're in a room and that room is sealed and you're just breathing air in that one room and you never open the windows, you never open the door, you're gonna die, right? You're gonna asphyxiate. You're not gonna have clean oxygen anymore. You have to let new air come in. You have to you have to move around. And but for some reason we've completely destroyed that with our cities and our agriculture and things like that. And so of course we created a world of scarcity, not because there literally is limited resources, but because we stayed in one area expecting all the resources to come to us and to extract, excuse me, the same resources over and over and over again. So yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy. Once people stop giving and begin hoarding, collective wealth declines. If we overcome the fear of scarcity, scarcity itself disappears. Common resources will be bountiful if everyone shares and contributes, or even if most people do. People like to be active to create and improve things. If people are ensured access to common resources and spared the poverty of wage slavery, they will create plenty of the things they need and that give them pleasure, as well as the infrastructure required to make and distribute these things. Beautiful. This chapter was really fantastic and super excited to get into the next section talking about the environment. Let me know what you thought about this section and what you learned from this. If you, even if you disagreed with something, let me know. We can have a conversation about it. But yeah, it's so good to like just really think about these things and to look around the world and be like, huh, why do we do that? Like, is that really necessary? Why do we live in one place for, decades, hundreds of years, um, when the world is so big? Right? That's why the world feels so small because you stay in one area and you only ever see a little itty bitty piece of it. Right? The world will feel a lot bigger if you actually move around, and yeah, it feels smaller too because we can move around faster. But if we have more people moving around and people able to create their own communities in different places, then even those communities themselves will evolve over the years. So as you move around, whenever you revisit an area, it has changed. And so, that sense of newness, sense of novelty, that sense of being in a big world comes back anyways. So yeah, it's either way you cut it, I think it just makes more sense to have a more diverse world, to move around, to um, not be in one place and hoard resources all the time, stuff like that. Just so much we need to change and do. But a lot of it, though, is stuff that we have done, right? It's stuff that we have historically done, that has worked for us for a long time. And just because we have more technology now, more people now, does not mean that those things are not possible. If anything, it means those things are more important than ever before, right? Because that's the only way that we can survive, that we know will allow us to survive for a longer period of time. We know that what we have today is not sustainable, right? Being in one place, just extracting, it it literally does not create the opportunity for the nature to replenish itself, for our cells to rejuvenate, for our minds to replenish, to be more creative and things like that. I'm talking forever now, but yeah, you get what I mean. Hopefully, and I'll end it there. So next time we talk about this book, we're going to go on to the next chapter. And thanks as always for listening and for watching. And have a great day. See ya.